I stand by what I said before. The second bite was just as good as the first. It is basically impossible to eat Italian food without running face first into tomatoes, which are so foundational to Italian cooking and to Italian cuisine. In this chapter, I am going to show you 2 different recipes that really give you a sense of all of the tomatoes' versatility. First up, I have a bruschetta with marinated tomato, in which the tomatoes are raw but marinated, and it just brings out all of their beautiful, saucy lusciousness. Then I have a 10-minute spicy grated tomato sauce with pasta, where the tomatoes are grated and barely cooked, so you get all of that amazing tomato flavor. For the bruschetta, I have chosen Roma tomatoes or plum tomatoes. I'm using these because they actually have very few seeds, which is nice when you're having a raw tomato to not have that big seed packet. To take out the core, I'm just using the tip of my knife. Once they're all cored, I'm gonna go ahead and quarter them. As I'm going, I'm transferring everything into this dish. This is gonna be the dish that I marinate all of the tomatoes in. All right, so as I go, I'm gonna season along the way with salt and pepper. All right, this is fresh oregano. There's so many fresh herbs that pair really beautifully with tomatoes, oregano being one of them, marjoram, tarragon, definitely basil. And I'm not actually going to serve the sprigs of oregano at the end. They're really here to lend a lot of flavor, so I'm just leaving them whole and tucking them into the dish. Another flavor that goes amazing with tomatoes is garlic. So I'm gonna use a few cloves, but again, these are going in to be part of the marinade, and their flavor is gonna infuse into the olive oil. The olive oil is gonna infuse into the tomatoes, so that garlicky flavor will eventually get into the tomato flesh, but no one has to eat a big raw clove of garlic at the end. I'm just gonna use the flat side of the knife, give those a whack. Garlic is in. I'm just gonna season around so that the garlic got some love. And I wouldn't want to toss this. Tomatoes, when they're very ripe, are, delicate, and we don't wanna smash and bash the flesh of the tomato. The recipe calls for a cup of olive oil. You might need a little bit more, you might need a little bit less, depending on the dimensions of your dish. So I'm not going to measure because I am going to add until I know we're there, which is just enough olive oil to barely kiss the top layer of the tomatoes. And you really do want them just barely submerged. I know it seems like a lot of olive oil. Olive oil is not inexpensive. This oil, once the tomatoes have been marinated, can be strained and used again. It's one of my favorite noises. All right, so as these sit, they will release some of their juices, and you'll see tomato juice start to mingle with the olive oil. So this looks beautiful, and it will also taste beautiful if you eat it right away, but it is better to give it a little bit of time. 1 hour, 2 hours at room temperature is awesome. And if you think about it, the day before, maybe you just got your market haul home, get your tomatoes prepped up, letting it sit overnight, covered in the fridge for 24 hours is like the ideal situation. So I'm gonna go ahead and cover these. You don't have to flip them, you don't have to turn them, just cover them and pop them in the fridge. Okay, so I've let my tomatoes sit for as long as I could. I'm gonna grab them from the fridge. So you can see the way the tomatoes have kind of shrunken down a little bit. And now this is a beautifully infused tomatoey, herby, garlicky, olive oil marinade. So to build the bruschetta, I have some nice toasted country bread, something crusty. You want something that's got like a little bit of texture, can stand up to all of these saucy ingredients. If you like raw garlic, take a cut end of a garlic clove, and just rub it over the toasted bread. I'm using a slotted spatula. You can use a slotted spoon, anything, just so that as you pick up the tomatoes, you don't want to pull a ton of oil with you, but enough. And just laying that over my toasty garlic rubbed bread. I always season at the end with a little extra salt. This is flaky salt. You can continue to use kosher, but something that will just have that bright hit of salt right at the end and a little bit of texture. And this is my dad's vinegar. So in addition to growing tomatoes and overloading us with an insane harvest in August, my dad recycles the little bits of red wine left in each bottle and makes his own vinegar. So I'm gonna add a few drops of that, and the acidity will really complement the flavors of the tomato. I do this on caprese salads also. Just a little extra brightness is gonna bring out all of the flavors. A little pepper. And you can garnish with any fresh tender herb that you have. I'm using basil. This to me is like a beautiful summer meal starter, and just have something simple and beautiful and appetizing and delicious. Last thing, a tiny bit more of the oil from the marinade. So many flavors. I get the garlic flavor off of the bread, but then this delicious, soft, juicy, tender, sweet tomato on top, and then the salt and the pepper and the grassy pepperiness of the olive oil with the vinegar. I love it so much. So I hope this empowers you to take a raw tomato and turn it into something really, really special. I'm gonna get started now on the 10-minute spicy grated tomato sauce. I love this method of grating tomatoes instead of chopping or food processing them, because it actually removes the skin and kind of peels back the seeds at the same time. It is a really fast and very efficient way to get a big tomato down into almost a pulp. The ingredients for this dish are 3 large beefsteak tomatoes, which is about 2 pounds, a 1/4 cup of extra virgin olive oil, kosher salt, freshly ground pepper, a handful of fresh basil sprigs, plus a few leaves, and a pound of spaghetti. Now I'm gonna start by grating the tomatoes. The first thing that you should do is cut off the base of the tomato. This is going to expose the flesh, and then you won't end up trying to grate through the skin for your very first motion. So now that the flesh is exposed, I'm using this large grater. If you have a box grater, use the large holes of your box grater, and then just making sure to keep your fingers out of the way. Just start grating the tomato. And you can see, even though I've just done a little bit, that the skin of the tomato is just furling back and not going through the teeth of the grater, and the flesh is falling through. So once I get down to the top, the tomato is really pushed back. I'm stopping at the core, all the flimsy pieces of the skin, and then you just set that aside. So having a tomato sauce that can cook really quickly, as opposed to something that's going to be simmering for hours and hours over the stove, means that I'm going to preserve that really fresh taste of the tomato because it's barely cooked. I want to make sure I have all that lovely tomato juice. I have 4 cloves of garlic here for the sauce. And I'm thinly slicing the garlic because, again, I want everything in the sauce to cook really quickly. And so having the garlic in smaller pieces means it will also cook quickly. So now with my garlic prepped and my tomatoes grated, I've got my olive oil, basil, red pepper flakes, some boiling water for your pasta, and it's time to make the sauce. The first thing I'm going to do is set this pot over medium heat and then add the olive oil, garlic. I'm gonna go into the pan. Season every step of the way with salt and pepper. Red chili flakes. And I'm also going to put a few whole sprigs of basil. This is gonna infuse the sauce with a delicious herby flavor and aroma. As soon as the garlic is translucent, I'm gonna go ahead and add the grated tomatoes. And even though I seasoned the garlic, now I have to season the tomato itself. Okay, so this is exactly what I want to see because I want this to go fast. There's a nice rapid simmer going on. And this is gonna go for about 10 minutes until it's very slightly thickened, and then I'll give it another taste. Now for the pasta, you could really use any shape that you like. I'm using spaghetti because it's just kind of a classic twirl. Check your package of pasta when you drop it in. Every brand is a little bit different, but in an ideal world, the pasta cooking time and the tomato simmering time are going to be about the same. If you had to err on either side, it would be okay to have your sauce waiting for your pasta, but I would never want to have cooked pasta waiting for sauce because then the pasta would overcook. Because the pasta is going directly into the sauce, it's going to continue to cook in the sauce. So taking it out when it's a little less cooked than you ultimately want it is a smart move. Noodles and sauce are finally together. And as I toss, I'm looking for any of those large sprigs of basil that were in the sauce. If I were smart, I would have taken these out first. This is one of the fastest, most delicious, crowd-pleasing pastas you can make. To finish the pasta, I've got a little extra basil that I'm just gonna tear to kind of release the aromas. Add a little bit more black pepper and a little pinch of flaky salt. With a little bit of the extra sauce left on the bottom of the plate, I like to just make sure everybody's got a tad. And you can also pass the red chili flake at the table, or you can just make an executive decision for everybody. And that's it, pasta with spicy grated tomato sauce. The sauce is concentrated, it's bright, it's really, really flavorful, but it's also clinging to the noodles in a really wonderful way. This is delicious. It is all about the tomato. Such a simple dish, so few ingredients, but taking care with every single step to get the ideal texture of both the sauce and the noodle. A little bit of herbaceousness from the basil. The seasoning is right on the money. I love this dish. You will never get sick of eating it. In this chapter, we have focused on only one ingredient, the tomato. Today you learned how to make a bruschetta, taking a raw tomato and really getting into an added value way of serving it with the olive oil and garlic and herbs, just infusing the actual tomato flesh. And then in the 10-minute spicy grated tomato sauce, making sure to maintain like the freshness and the flavor of that still warm out of the ground tomato, cooking it to amplify those flavors, maintaining all of its brightness. I hope seeing these ways to use tomatoes will inspire you to cook with tomatoes and try out some of these dishes.